respond to your questions.
Andersson-Charest.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and committee members, for giving the opportunity to the Parliamentary Centre to appear before the committee today. As the Chair mentioned, the Parliamentary Centre is a Canadian not-for-profit, non-partisan organization that for almost 50 years now have supported good governance practices at the national, subnational and regional levels. And we have helped build the capacity of approximately 120 legislators to better perform the lawmaking, oversight and representative roles. Working closely with all institutions and actors of governance, including civil society and the media. And while our work is global, it might be interesting to know that we started our existence as a support centre for the Canadian Parliament linked to international affairs, trade and defence. I will focus my remarks on why the Parliamentary Centre is supportive of a whole-of-government approach linked to the peace operations, and the importance of ensuring that good governance is a critical component of this approach to reinforce security and build sustainable peace. As you know, Canada is one of the countries that are committed to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And this agenda recognizes that there can be no sustainable development without peace and no peace and security without sustainable development. Our experience is also that there can be no sustainable development without good governance. Good governance can be seen as the immune system to help provide the stability and the reliability and predictability needed to ensure rule of law, citizen security, and a business climate that is favorable to investment and a national prosperity. This helps mitigate state fragility and conflict. Good governance provides the best possible process for decision-making that is inclusive, transparent, and accountable, as well as equitable and meaningful at all levels. It is also the most effective way to empower nations to take ownership of their own efforts to achieve sustainability and peace. Peace operations require political will and the relevant capacity, as we heard. Many conflicts are only resolved or prevented in the first place when the different stakeholders can reconcile their views and agree on how to build a stable functioning model of governance. Building peace and good governance can therefore not be separated. The first cannot happen without the other. Support to strong and effective institutions should therefore be seen as one of many tools in a comprehensive toolbox that Canada can use for conflict prevention, peace building, and post-conflict reconstruction. And we recognize and strongly support the idea that a combination of tools and actors need to be used during the different stages of peace operations. Further, referring to Mr. Chair's remarks before, the tools used have to be adjusted depending on the unique historical, cultural, and political context of each country. When engaging in peace operations, it's important that Canada moves forward with a comprehensive and holistic approach, built on cooperation and coordination between different actors, such as the military, police, diplomatic corps, civilian experts, and organizations like ours working on democratic development, humanitarian assistance, and disaster relief. The resources available for peace operations in Canada and elsewhere are not likely to increase at the same pace as the security challenges around the world. Canada will therefore need to do more with less and to be innovative in addressing these challenges. This is why the Parliamentary supports the whole-of-government approach. Increased coordination between and within the departments of global affairs, national defense, and public safety is required to identify the gaps and avoid the overlaps. When we combine the knowledge of our highly skilled personnel from our military and police force with that of Canadian organizations and experts, it will add value to our peace operations. It is important that this joint action is effective, efficient, and results-oriented. It needs to be based on a common understanding of what is a successful peace operation and have well-defined criteria to determine progress and measure results. and to ensure that good governance become a critical component to reinforce security and build sustainable peace. The existing gap in this support needs to be addressed. There is an increased focus on governance in international development project, and the revamped Peace and Stabilizations Operations Program at Global Affairs will help, but long approval processes are an obstacle to effective, relevant, and timely engagement. When working with fragile states and countries making strides towards peaceful development, time is always of essence. And Canada does have the mechanism to respond to natural and man-made disasters through the Disaster Assistance Response Team. But the Parliamentary Centre recommends that a similar mechanism be put in place to respond quickly when governance systems are failing and result in escalating security challenges. This could be mirrored on the UK cross-government and fast reaction mechanism called the Conflict Stabilization and Security Fund. Parliamentary Centre is one of the organizations that have been pre-qualified to participate in this framework. In closing, the Parliamentary Centre would just like to stress that to ensure the success of the Canada's peace operations, good governance cannot be overlooked. I thank you again, Mr. Chair and committee members, for allowing Parliamentary Centre to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
We'll start with Senator Jaffer and then go to Senator Dagenet.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to both of you for being here today and also for the work you do. I'm going to start with you, Mr. LaRose Edwards, and I know that, and you may have mentioned it, I missed it, but you also send people for election observing, and I know a lot of Canadians participate with Canada on many of your election observing. Am I correct? You do that, right?
Yes. One flying back today from Russia, they observed the Duma elections, including someone from Whitehorse.
Really?
Yes. Oh yeah. No, we work very hard to make sure we get cross-Canada representation, youth, older folks, and it was over 50. Well, I think it was about 55% women. So we try to get a good balance on it.
You like you all the more.
Yeah. Matter of fact, our fastest
Don't
deployment.
take my time. You can use his time to tell him about that. Wait.
Okay, we'll step away from
Because otherwise,
You want to talk about Whitehorse?
no.
Well, that was our fastest deployment.
wait.
I'll talk to you later on that.
Okay.
But I also know that you have been pushing the UN resolutions on 1325. And, in your submission, you've talked about, and I quote, that capacity program with view of resurging and reestablishing the UN reform function. And but what I'd like to hear from you further, and you did say, my colleagues all looked at me when you said it, that you were including women. That's music to my ears. But I'd like to know more specifically how you are including women. I do know that on your election observing, I'm very impressed in how you're including women. But in the UN, what efforts are you making? Especially for women in decision-making, not just numbers.
As you could see from the tenor of my comments, I truly believe in the force of individuals who will make the difference, and collectively then they reach critical mass. And to change the culture of the UN, you've just got to have more women in. Not only to have more women in a proper representation, but let's be realistic. Looking at issues, women's issues, children's issues out there, women have a more of an inherent understanding of the challenges facing refugees, IDPs, people in crisis. So the more women you have in the UN, the better. And it needs to be across all levels. You need people coming into the P2 level that 15, 20 years from now will be D1s and D2s. And you also need to populate the higher levels too.
Can you tell us what a D1 is?
So a D1 is the first level of the diplomatic grade. So it goes P, there is no P1s, there's P2, 3, 4, 5, and then they become diplomatic. Diplomatic D1, 2, 3. Sorry.
Just so that those
1, 2,
that are
3.
observing on TV understand what we're speaking
Right.
of.
And so the diplomatic positions are extremely important. We look to also inject women into that. And I'm not too sure if you picked on my point that, yes, I would like to advance strong Canadian women, but we also have a roster of strong third world women from Africa, Middle East in particular. And so that roster is probably, I think it's somewhere in the range of about 16,000 right now. Large numbers of women on there. And the UN just does not have very good mechanisms to get strong women into the hiring process. I mean, I know a lot of people who want to hire women, and they say, well, listen, we're presented with 15 candidates, and there were only 3 women, and they didn't have a lot of qualifications.
Do you work with UN Women?
Yes, we've been working with UN agencies across the board.
No, UN Women. UN Women.
Yes, and so not currently. We're not actually funded to do that work anymore,
Oh, okay.
which is a little bit of the challenge for us as an NGO. We can do things on the side as we do.
My next question is the Parliamentary Centre. I've been here for 16 years, and when I first came here, I worked a lot with the Parliamentary Centre, and I was just very proud of the work you were doing in Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, Senegal. I've seen your work firsthand, so I want to thank you for your work. I hope you're continuing to do that work. But for me, what I have now as observing from far, because I know I haven't been involved lately, is that the work you've done in Indonesia of how you've included women and how that has sort of really built their capacity, which has really been good. But I'd really like to hear from you as to how you are implementing, especially with women, Resolution 1325. How are you building capacity? And I know that you're working in many countries in Africa as well, so it would be helpful to see how you're involving civilians and how you could help our peace operations in including civilians.
Yeah, women have always been very central to our programs around the world, and as you mentioned, in Africa in particular. We always try and make sure that we work specifically with the women to make sure that they have the capacity to take on larger decision-making roles and not necessarily work in the traditional sense and the traditional, so to speak, committees, but are also members of a defense committee, finance committee, and so on, so they can have the true impact on their countries. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is a little while back now. Before the earthquake in Haiti, we had a large program where we trained women that were wanting to be elected members to help empower them to run for the election and to know what to do when elected, which is not very common when women come into Parliament. They have very little training prior to, men and women actually. So that is a big focus of our program there. We have worked with the ECOWAS Parliament, where we developed a gender strategy, and this was actually linked to conflict prevention and management in an overall program to strengthen the regional parliament in this capacity. And recently we worked with women parliamentarians in Burma or Myanmar, where we brought together women MPs and senators from the both houses and from the regional with Canadian peers, and also other regional peers from Cambodia and Nepal, to engage on common interests and see how they could work on together beyond the political divide for the interest of women.
So I know the chair will stop me in a minute, so I just want to take this opportunity to formally thank Mr. Miller, who ran the Parliamentary Centre for many, many years. If you're ever speaking to him, tell him that certainly the Parliament of Canada has appreciated the work he did for the Parliamentary Centre and for Canadians, and it's good to see you're continuing his work. Thank you.
Thank you. I will pass the message for sure.
I have a question, one for each witness. Mr. Larose, a witness yesterday said that, in his opinion, a peacekeeping mission was essentially a political mission. I think that you talked about it during your presentation. Based on your very long-standing experience in various missions, could you tell us who leads the peacekeeping mission? Is it the politics behind it or the military forces?
The political side. The political side, and this is the, I know the Hippo report is a huge report, and it's a hard read at times to grind through it, but I strongly recommend it. It makes that point time and again that as important as the military are, as important as the police are, that the political agenda of the mission and the politics, not only within the mission, but the politics with local civil society, with local government, with the region, that drives everything. And whenever one falls back on sort of saying, and the Congo is a good example, okay, we're just going to throw in enough troops and it'll sort it out. No, we don't have enough troops in all of NATO to sort out the Congo. If they cannot bring themselves to a political solution, it will not happen. And so politics drives everything, which is why we need to work harder at getting stronger civilians into these operations that understand the politics and how to work the politics. You senators are particularly understand the importance of politics, and so, no, there is no military solution. They are key, they're critical enablers in military speak, but they're not the ones that will make it happen.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Could we perhaps have an efficient peacekeeping mission without the support of military forces?
Operations that are purely civilian. But the big ones in the complicated areas where there's a conflict or potential of conflict, then the military are extremely important. And so I don't want to diminish the military role, but it's like saying we also need logisticians and we need to have people flying aircraft for the civilians. But the solution will be in enabling the local society, local government, to come to a political resolution of the problems facing them, and let us get, pull out. So no, we need the military, and we desperately need the military to be better aware of the politics that they're getting into, and this is perhaps a bit of a shortcoming right now. So they're critically important, but they will not be the drivers for success.
Madame Charest.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Ms. Charest. I have not forgotten you. It's a simple question. However, your answer could help us. What is Canada not currently doing, and what could Canada easily do to be more efficient in conflicts and especially the prevention of conflicts?
I think the main problem right now is that many of the departments work between them. They're like silos, so there's no cooperation, coordination within Canada. And this is not just at the departmental level, it's between organizations as well. And we see the same also when we work in various countries. The Parliamentary Centre's approach has always been to look for partners and work in partnerships and complement other efforts that are being there. And I think this is really the approach, and that's why I talked about the whole of government approach and having the holistic approach. That will be the only way we will have success in our peace operations. And when we build on the strengths from organizations like Canada and combine that with that of other organizations that are also working closely with the organizations on the ground, that's when you're going to get that complete understanding of the situation in a country. We will never say that we're the experts in any of the countries where we work. We rely on our local partners to really show us what are your conditions, and that changes I'll give you one example. We've just started a project in Burkina Faso, and this, obviously, there's been a lot of instability in Burkina and the region, as we know, lately. But the reason why Burkina is now not in the conflict is because it has the political will. It has the strong civil society, and it has the will to build stronger governance institutions. We work directly with the National Assembly there, and the first intervention we had was to do a needs assessment of the full assembly. What are the needs of the MPs? What are the needs of the staff and the institution as a whole? Only then can we start our intervention. But to know that we also need to work with the local partners so they help us understand the cultural differences between the different representation and understanding the deep cultural differences and religious. Although Burkina has made great efforts to step beyond what is religion and so on, and that's also one of the reasons why it's a stronger country and could play a large role in Canada's missions in the region.
Merci beaucoup, madame. Merci, monsieur.
Senator White and then Senator Day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks to both of you for being here. The discussion going on now about a peace operation in Africa as an example, and we've had a lot of witnesses talk about the fact that it's not peacekeeping, that it's a peace operation, which I think is, from what I understand, a key difference. Mr. LaRose Edwards, could you walk us through how your organization supports that, from a developing conflict resolution techniques to good governance so the peace is outside of the military? Can you walk us through how that would happen, and should we end up in Mali as an example?
So our primary role is a resource of Canadian expertise. Well, now half of our roster of 26,000 are non-Canadians, and so we can draw on those experts and put those forward for engagements by those that are actually working on the ground. So I'll give you an example on the humanitarian
Please.
side. So in a humanitarian emergency, suddenly one part of the UN, UNICEF, WHO, others will need a particular expert. They'll contact us, and with either the British funding that we have, the $5 million, or the Canadian funding, the $1.5 million, we will hire the expert that they want, and we'll second them out to them literally in days. So we're a rapid response source of experts, sometimes prepaid or sometimes just saying, here's the resume, here's their contact information. If you want them, go for it, hire them directly yourself. And so the whole range there, we're a source of experts for the Canadian military if they're doing training. We're a source of experts for foreign affairs if they're putting operations on the ground. We're just about to be contracted by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to help them staff their flyout teams from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office with experts from Africa and the Middle East, because we've got that kind of a roster, probably one of the best rosters in the world. And so that's why the British use us, is that we have a roster that they can't otherwise put their hands on, those individuals. So we're a source of experts, one by one. Strengthening the UN and the international community one expert at a time, which is sort of one of our sub-mantras.
Yes, go ahead.
So specific needs, you're able to walk into your roster and try to, as we just heard from two military officers here, try to increase capability and reduce the gap.
Yes, and now sometimes,
specifically,
and two examples on the police side,
please.
it was not easy for the Canadian government or for the RCMP mechanism to put police experts into Haiti. So we did 2 rotations, first of 25 and then 20, where we hired, equipped, armed, uniformed, retired police, send them down and attach them to the UN mission there. Equally in Afghanistan, we put a police team into Afghanistan in 2002. When nobody else really wanted to take that risk. And we said, yeah, we can do it. We're an NGO. Yeah, we can do that. And so we also put operations on the ground ourselves, but those operations usually are not standalone. They're attached to some existing mechanism. So
UN CivPol, RCMP contingent, you could have 10 of your officers in Haiti as an example.
yes.
So they would be there as Canadians, or are they there as, sorry, Mr. Chair. So are they there as Canadians, or are they there as Canada?
Oh, no, well, it's a hard call, because the Canadian government will use us because for one reason or another it's complicated for them to actually hire and deploy people through a Canadian government mechanism. And equipping them with weapons was a good example in that instance. We had to do it on our own. Okay, so we actually had to go through the Americans to find weapons and stuff like that. Long story, but there's sometimes that an NGO can just here's the money, just make it happen. If you fail, on your head be it, it's not going to reflect on us. We're just giving the money to try to make it happen. So I don't want to overstate the case, but sometimes we have that ability to operate where it's at a certain point in time difficult for either a UN agency or the Canadian government to actually do it.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it.
Senator Day.
I'm reading, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Mr. LaRose Edwards. I'm reading from your presentation, and you're talking, it was an area you didn't go into, was your relationship with OSCE, and then you talk about the observers in Russia. Were all of these observers found by you from your roster and then loaned to OSCE? Is that how that works?
Exactly. So just let me make sure I get the figures right. So we've actually, over the years, with OSCE operations alone, OSCE election observation missions, we've deployed 730 Canadians on 69 different missions. And so, again, we're doing it right now in Russia.
Yeah.
That's something that the Canadian government's trying to decide whether it wants to keep on doing that or not. I think it's a very cheap option of giving one group of Canadians some contact with things on the international side. They take it back to the community, talk about it in their community, so that's good. But quite apart from that, we have funds from the Canadian government to have 50 Canadians as part of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. So that's ongoing right now, and that's a very valuable contribution to the OSCE mission.
Are these individuals from your roster who work under direction of OSCE to go off and do that?
So we second them to them,
Yes.
and they have day-to-day command and control. One interesting side blow on the OSCE.
For the record, OSCE.
OSCE.
Organization
for-
for Security Cooperation in Europe.
Yeah,
Right.
just so
Right.
that our viewers once again understand what we're speaking of.
Yes, so the
Okay, thank you.
Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a Cold War construct
Right.
of the Warsaw Pact and the NATO countries who found this as a way to try to lower the tension during the Cold War, and it's lived on beyond that. And no longer, its name no longer applies, so everybody just calls it the OSCE. And one of their components is called ODIHR, the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, and they're critical in election observation.
The next one will be Oh My.
Oh my! Well, every once in a while, people say, "Oh my!" Oh my. No, I'm
Very
being
good, Senator
facetious.
Day.
They're a very good outfit, but they're where have I got it? Okay, they have other operations, and so they've got 3,000 civilian personnel. This is the OSCE in 19 field operations in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. And of those 3,000 civilians, only 17 are Canadians. And these are totally cost-free to Canada. They serve as volunteers. All their costs and stuff are covered by the OSCE. We could increase that number easily to 100 to 200 out of 3,000. Easily. But we've only got 17. And this is an area that I think really would be useful. I know you're looking at UN peace operations, but this is a very similar kind of entity, a similar kind of activity, peace and security.
Yeah, I'll come back to you if I can with the time available. I'd like to go to Ms. Andersson-Charest. Could you describe for us where you get your funding?
It is mixed. We are, like I said, an NGO, so we completely project funded. We don't have any other resources. But right now, our funding is about 60% from the Canadian government and 40% from other donors, including the UK, the EU. So it's very mixed.
And that 50% from the Canadian government, any strings attached to it, or is it
It's
just
directly linked to a project.
to a project?
Yes, we
Okay.
have no core funding whatsoever.
So, no, that's what I was looking to. So
Yeah.
you would have to negotiate each project and then determine whether you could get into it, but
Yep.
based on the funding that
Yes.
might be available.
Yes, it is, and it is hard for organizations like ours because it doesn't give us the predictability
Yes.
to be active and respond when the needs come.
Okay? And You describe yourself as an NGO, and now I understand. Do you have a roster of people that that go around the world helping nations with respect to governance and legislative process?
Yes, we do. We don't have a formalized roster like Canada, but what we do is we draw on the expertise of both acting members of parliament and senators and former. We work closely with the Association of Former Parliamentarians.
Okay.
And we work with experts in the various areas. So when we have a particular need, I'll give you an example. In Ukraine as well, your colleague Senator Anderchuk was part of a group that went there.
Yes.
Together with the Honorable David Pratt and retired Major General Charles Sullivan and international expert called David Law to discuss with peers on the parliamentary oversight of the security and defense sector in Ukraine. This was an opportunity when they brought together different stakeholders in Ukraine as well for the first time. They hadn't talked about this topic together. So by bringing them together and sharing their experiences, because we strongly believe in peer-to-peer
Yes.
exchanges. There's nothing as effective
So
as
you
that.
found David Pratt as one of the former parliamentarians,
Yes.
and you found Andrechuk as a current parliamentarian.
Yes.
So
As a
that's
senator.
that's a resource for you. We'll be
Yes.
all parliamentarians sitting around this table as
Yes.
well, presumably.
Yes, and we are always looking to engage our elected members and senators.
And my colleague from the Yukon would like to know: does he have to register, or would you find him?
We do keep a CV roster, so please send us it along, and I will make sure that we
There
keep
you
you in
have
mind
it.
for future operations.
Now, I have just
Senator,
one-
are you trying to have me move on, or, I mean,
Just-
we might as well have a discussion here.
just like to see your name on a number of rosters.
Okay, Senator Day, go.
I have
for
one
it.
more question.
About Whitehurst, I'm sure.
Of Mr. LaRose
Proceed.
Edwards, and that's with respect to this funding again. You explained $5 million from the UK and $1.5 million or $1.3 million from Canada. Core funding, or is this project-oriented funding?
Well, as Petra knows, Canadian NGOs, we never get core funding. In 20 years, we've never had core funding. It's always project-related, which makes it a little bit difficult, but doable. So I'm not complaining. It would be nice to have core funding, but that's perhaps a luxury that we'll never have.
So are you speaking on average when you give those numbers? Is that the average for this year?
Yeah, so the average for this year will be about $5 million from the British,
Yeah.
and I think because it's the numbers are increasing in the costs of having the folks in Ukraine and other activities with the Canadian government, that's probably going to get close to about $4 million this year. So our biggest funder is the British government. We're in negotiations with government from ECHO, the European Union humanitarian arm, on another initiative we have on the humanitarian side. So, yes.
So when you take funding from the UK of $5 million, for example, presumably you would be expected to do something for the UK and their roster of people, or those from the UK who are on your roster, to try and place them instead of Canadians. Because,
No, actually, the British are extremely good on this one. And so when we get a request from a UN agency, so UNICEF, for example, they need this kind of an expert. Many of the experts that we are providing right now are from developing countries, so are from Africa, from Middle East, because they have a unique skill set and an awareness. And the British government is extremely supportive of that.
Okay.
And so every once in a while, we'll hire someone who's British. We don't preclude the Brits. But they make that is not one of their criteria.
Okay,
for funding.
my final question is that we're doing a defense policy review and looking into the new expanded initiatives of the current government with respect to peacekeeping. And in our report, if we said we felt the type of work that you're doing is worthwhile and fits in and complements this expanded role of peacekeeping internationally, and that there should be some core funding, you wouldn't object to that?
We would appreciate that immensely.
If I may just add something to that, I think core funding can be dangerous as well, because some organizations just feel comfortable and don't feel that they have to work as hard. I think what we really look for is predictability. And knowing that when there's a need for the work that we do, doesn't take a year or two in some cases before we can actually start our work. By the time we have submitted a proposal and we get an approval, often the original intent of the intervention is no longer valid. That's the reality of today. That's why I encourage you to look at the current whole-of-government mechanism that is in place in the UK to really bring together organizations in consortium and have them pre-qualify for particular work. This is a very effective way of engaging organizations. I'll give you a little bit of information about this mechanism. It's focused on 3 different laws. It has 3 teams, thematic areas called governance, security, and justice is the first one. The second one is on conflict prevention, stabilizations, and peace building. And the third one is on defense support services. So all these complement each other in an overall approach on peace operations. And just last year, in the last fiscal year, this budget was the equivalent of 1.78 billion Canadian dollars. Ooh. Yes. And the process there is that the consortia, they're pre-qualified. So when there's an intervention that they want to do, they give advance notice to the consortia that have pre-qualified. When the terms of reference and the detailed approach of this intervention comes out, the consortia have about 2 weeks to prepare a proposal. Mm-hmm. Within 2 weeks, we know who the winner of the bid is. Yep. So that is one example.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. I know we're coming to a conclusion here. One of the questions that I have, if I could put it to the witnesses, and you've touched on a number of times, each of you have, in respect to the holistic whole of government approach. If we do deploy or become involved in any given conflict or theater in the world, so that we're not leaving those and not helping to create those civil institutions that should be in place to be able to so these people can take care of themselves. What we're finding is we're being asked to review the defense policy review, but it's been said by a number of witnesses that the foreign policy of the government isn't really being reviewed in concert with the defense policy. And the question I have is, do you believe Canada needs to undertake a foreign policy review to complement the present ongoing defense policy review? And Mr.
I don't think there's any need to do that. I think Foreign Affairs already has a good idea of what needs to be done out there. Because Canada had retrenched a little bit, the scope of things to do are legion. I would strongly encourage the government to just get moving and start doing things and see where that leads. And that's how international affairs are driven. You make your plans and then you start to change them immediately because the situation out there changes. And so I don't think there's any need for a review. I don't think there was a need for a review on the development side either. I think Canada has been doing this for a long time, and if we don't know what needs to be done at this point in time, perhaps there's something wrong. And I don't think there is anything wrong. I think collectively we have some good ideas. Let's just start doing it.
I agree with that point. I think there has been, we were involved in the international assistance review and the policy review for the international assistant, and it has had a very similar focus as the defense policy review, I think, with having the holistic and whole of government. But I think it's in practice where things need to be looked at to avoid continuing working in the silos that exist within global affairs and other departments, because that really hinders effective interventions.
This will be the final question.
Yeah, it's a simple one, but it might be a long answer. I appreciate your presentations. You answered all the questions that I had. Do you think parliamentarians understand the work that you do, or do we need to have a better understanding? Thanks.
Well, most parliamentarians would not know what we do. We're a pretty small outfit in that sense, even though we've got a roster of 26,000 and we're doing a lot of things out there. Obviously, they need to rely on the civil servants as our interface with what the Canadian government is doing. And so it'd be nice. I'm delighted to have been invited here. I'm delighted to meet with any of you separately. But I think the reality will always be that we're flying a little under the radar, and that's okay. We're small. We just get on with it.
I think parliamentarians probably understand the work of the Parliamentary Centre better than anyone, although we are not very known to members of parliaments and senators. We have not been working in Canada for quite some years now, so we are doing our best to make sure that we're reminding you whenever we have the chance. We really appreciate this opportunity, but I think what is important is that we continue feeding the message what Canadian organizations can do and what they can do to complement other efforts by the UN, by other international organizations, to add that approach that is so valuable. We've experienced it firsthand that we are chosen as the partner because we are a bilingual organization, because we take the time to listen to needs, and that we target our support based on what these needs are. So I think that is really the message that we need to give to members of parliament and senators, that don't forget that we exist and that we can actually complement the work of others.